Is a lunch and learn, a conversation with Judy Heumann to discuss her activism during the time of passing of the ADA. And at the time of that passage, what she was doing and what she's doing now and what has been happening since that time. So we're glad that you could be with us today to enjoy this conversation and to learn from Judy and all of her experiences and activism in her fight for disability rights. Thank you for being with us, and I hope you have a great day.
Hello, everybody. My name is Heather Dibley, and I'm a recent graduate this past summer of the Rehabilitation Counseling Program here at SDSU. I will be your facilitator. My audio description is that I'm a white female. I use the pronouns she, her, hers, and today I am wearing an animal print blouse with oval-framed glasses and my long brunette hair. You can also see that my background is a lake scene with fall foliage. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Knopf for a special announcement.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy that you're able to join us today. We are still waiting for Judy Heumann to join us. She had a special meeting with the State Department that went right up until 12:30 p.m. Central Time. So she'll be joining us here in a few minutes. But while we're waiting for her to join, I thought it would be a good idea to start a conversation about some recent productions and publications that Judy has been involved in. So as I'm not sure if you know or not, but Crip Camp is a documentary that is on Netflix, and it features part of Judy Heumann's advocacy. And hopefully we can have a conversation with Judy about her participation during that time. Oh, and I'm so happy. Here's Judy.
There I am.
Yeah. And then secondly, Judy just published a book called Being Human. And so if you have not gotten that book yet, please order your copy today because it is fabulous. And Heather is showing you a picture of the book cover of Being Human. So without further ado, we're so happy you can join us. I'd like to welcome Judy Heumann.
Sorry, everybody, I'm late. I was doing another event.
Hi, Judy. Thank you for being here. If you want to quick introduce yourself and provide a quick description of yourself, that would be wonderful.
Okay, my name is Judy Heumann. I'm a motorized wheelchair user. I am working out of my home, and we are in our foyer, which leads to our dining room. So we have many pictures on the wall and colorful tablecloths on our dining room table. And I am a 72-and-a-half-year-old woman with brown hair. I'm wearing glasses that are teal and purple, and I'm wearing a purplish blouse with long earrings.
Thank you, Judy. I wanted to start today, and my first question kind of surrounds your advocacy as a whole. You mentioned in your book, Being Human, how your mom was such a powerful and fierce support for you, and we see in Crip Camp that you're just a natural leader as a camp counselor. Can you talk to us a little bit about where that advocacy at such a young age came from? What pushed you to do that?
I was from Brooklyn. I really believe that had a lot to do with it. My parents were immigrants, and I was born in 1947. I'm Jewish, and my parents obviously were Jewish. And they came over from Germany because of the Holocaust. Each of them lost their parents and other family members on both sides. And when my mother was sent out of Germany in 1935, she was 12. She thought that she was going to see her family again. and never did. Likewise for my father. My father was in the military. He was in the Marines in the Second World War. So there was a lot of resilience within my parents. They got married, I guess, in 1945, 46. And I was born, I got married in 46, and I was born in 47. My mother was 8 months pregnant with my brother when I had polio. And so, you know, because polio was contagious, I was in isolation, and I was in an iron lung for a number of months. I put all these details in to kind of lay out, you know, what my family, like many other families, go through on a regular basis. And they made a decision that I was going to be the person that they wanted me to be before I acquired my polio, and which left me as a quadriplegic. And because at that time there were no laws in place making it illegal to discriminate, and there really weren't discussions about discrimination. My mother and father, they didn't know other people who had disabled people, kids in their families. They knew other families that had kids from the hospital, but you know, they didn't know those families as we were getting older. And my mother took me to school when I was 5 years old, like she later took my brother, but had an experience with me that was not like the experience she had with my brother. She took me to the school, pulled my wheelchair up the steps, and the principal said I couldn't go to the school because I was a fire hazard. So they didn't know what to do about that. They looked for other places for me to go, tried to get me into another private school. That didn't work out. Then the Board of Ed sent a teacher to my house for 2.5 hours a week for the first, second, third grade, and half of the fourth grade. Then I finally was able to get into school, but it was special ed classes only for disabled kids. And at that point, the classes had kids as old as 21 in them. I was the first student from my special ed classes to go to high school. Other kids stayed there, and they went to sheltered workshops. But when I started going to those classes, it was in a regular school. We call it the non-disabled kids, the kids upstairs. And, but my mother and other mothers began to recognize that if you used a wheelchair, you went back onto home instruction because the high schools weren't accessible. And so my mom and other moms in my school and other parts of the city began to organize to push the Board of Ed to get them to make some high schools accessible, which then allowed us not to have to go back on home instruction. So I tell you this because I was learning. People ask, you know, as a parent, what is your role? I think your role as a parent, whether you have a disabled kid or not, but in this case, we're talking about disability. Your role is to really help ensure that you keep moving forward, whether you're a parent or a guardian or a grandparent, whatever it may be. It's to really commit that your child, no matter how significant their disability, is going to be able to move forward. That instilled in me very much a sense, because you know, it was responsibility. My parents were taking responsibility for me, and my parents always taught me and my brothers that we had responsibility for ourselves, for our family, and that as we were getting older, we had to assume those responsibilities. So responsibilities were somewhat different for me than for my brothers, because of course they were going to go to high school, they were going to go to college. For me and my other friends with disabilities, that was not assured. And I've always liked to talk. I did play acting and various things like that. So I think it's important also that, you know, you grow as you do, and you gain confidence as you move forward. And for me, it's always important not to do things alone, but to do things with other disabled individuals and other people that I believe share a similar vision.
You talk about growing and responsibility. When we're talking with young kids that want to maybe become an advocate or support a cause, What would be the best advice that you have for them getting started?
You are an advocate. No one needs to give you a blessing to say you can become an advocate. I think it's very important that learning to speak up for what you want is very important. And it doesn't have to be a big thing that you want. It can be, you know, when you're, I mean, it depends also on, now we're talking about disabled people. It depends on your disability. It's a combination of the age that you are, how you are advocating for the game you want to play, or you want to go to bed later, or you want to get up earlier, or you want to wear this and you don't want to wear that. You like this food and not that food. All of those things are really learning how to become advocates for yourself. And I think that's very important. So I also believe that younger disabled people, high school students, college students, young kids, meeting other disabled people the same age, older, you know, people who can be mentors, people who we can look up to because they've made an achievement that we hope to be able to make in the future. That's very important. But I also think we need to really be demanding that media is more reflective of who we are. So I think, you know, we need to be looking at the children's books that we read to children. Are disabled kids just a natural part of what's going on? When we look at Sesame Street and other programs on TV, whatever they may be, or however you're getting them and whatever, because social media is always changing. I may not be using the right words. But whatever it is that kids and young adults are getting information from what they're reading, from what they're seeing, are we reflected? Not necessarily as a disabled person, but, you know, in a scene, are there disabled people in it? Are there disabled characters? You know, it's nice to see that there are, you know, cartoons and comic books that are coming out that are being done by disabled individuals or have disabled characters in them. I think that's very important. I think we all need to be speaking up and out about the absence of disability in media and the diversity of our disabilities. So, you know, there are hundreds of types of disabilities, and we represent all racial backgrounds, all religious communities, all sexual orientations, all socioeconomic, you know, statuses. We need to be able to see the diversity of who we are. So yes, we should see disabled white people, but yes, we need to see disabled Black people and Latinos and Asians and indigenous populations and on and on. And I think we also need to be looking at the careers that we want to go into. You know, what do we want to study? And really look to study in the fields that we believe we can make the most contributions in and evolve as we're getting older. But I think, you know, one of the important parts of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and various other laws and organizations and work that we've done is we're at a very different place than when I was first had polio. You know, there is a disability movement. The movement is evolving and growing. There are things that we can join and participate in or create new. But the world is very different than it was. And therefore, I think we need to take those opportunities. And I really want to say that, you know, you don't have to transition to become an advocate. Leader is not a label that you get. One can consider you a leader because other people respect what you're doing and they want to work with you. You can help refine your knowledge and hone your skills and things like that. But, you know, believe in yourself as much as you can. Reach out to other people who can help you do that. That's really, I think, the way things move forward, whether you have a disability or not.
What barriers do you still face in your advocacy work today?
Well, I would say that some of the barriers that I still face are difficulty in getting personal assistance services. That's been an issue forever. Being able to find people who are interested in doing the work, making sure that people are getting paid appropriate wages, looking at how government really doesn't have programs in place that allow you to earn a regular wage and get support for funding for personal assistance. You're either making a good salary, which fortunately I have been able to do, and spend a disproportionate amount of my income on personal assistance, or you have to keep your salary lower if you can get personal assistance, but not if you are in this middle ground, you know, of earnings. So I think we need to be, and for me, really, that's an issue that's important. I think one of the other areas that I'm facing, but it's certainly not just me, it's all of us, is we as disabled individuals really see ourselves in a different way than most non-disabled people. And so that struggle of getting non-disabled people to recognize the absence of disability and what it means, not just for us as individuals, but our society overall. And I think COVID is really an unfortunate but powerful example, because we see that a very substantial number of the people who are dying from COVID are living in restricted environments, nursing homes, other segregated environments. They shouldn't have been living there in the past. They should have been able to live in the community with the supports that they need in accessible housing, with personal assistance services, etc. And paying people appropriate wages so that they can do the work that we need to live in the community. I think that's really one of the issues, is getting the average person to recognize that what we're saying we need, we're also saying we need it because others need it or will need it. So someone who acquires a disability as a result of aging and may need assistance in their home or to be around the community, they need to understand that what we're fighting for is not just for us, it's for them also. And that they need to see themselves as a part of who we are. And I think getting people to not be afraid of disability. I mean, obviously when you go, I don't know, because I've always had my disability. I think, have you always had your disability, Heather?
Yes, I was born with cerebral palsy.
Yes, so I think you and I and people who've had our disabilities when we're younger, it's a little different because, you know, we are disabled people. It is who we are. For people who are non-disabled and then acquire their disabilities, short-term or long-term, I would say that in many ways they have different obstacles. They have advantages because they know about the way things were for them before, and they can be fighting to get back to where they were before as far as employment, community participation. So for me, it's getting media to appropriately represent us, seeing and hearing our voices, facilitating dialogue that's more meaningful and not looking at those of us with disabilities in a pathetic, pitiful way. Recognizing that what we're talking about is diversity and wanting to be respected and included in our society overall, and that we need to have meaningful discussions with people so that they can understand how they're being helpful or hurtful in really breaking down the barriers that have limited us, that has also an economic impact on our countries when you have 70% of disabled people of working age not being able to get jobs. And now with COVID, I think we have to really be looking at the changing world of work and what impact that's going to have on disabled individuals re-entering the workforce. I think we have to be really concerned about that. There have been at least 1 million disabled people laid off from jobs since COVID's been out.
You talked about having meaningful conversations and employment. Something I've noticed is when you try to have those conversations and kind of showcased in Crip Camp as well, money comes into play, and these high institutions and other entities want to talk about that they can't afford it in the budget, and a lot of them would prefer to take on litigation. Do you have any perspective to give to us, maybe how to go about those conversations instead of just leading with the possible litigation?
Well, I mean, do you have an example?
Like at one of the institutions I've been a part of, an accessible door is not like on the outside is available, but like for an office, because let's say I can't open the door and I need like a push plate door, and they say there's not enough money in our budget, or we can't, approve that because you're the only one using the door.
Okay, so there are many ways to look at this. One of them is you're not the only one. And I think that's very important because, people, I hear people more and more, people who don't consider themselves to have a disability, asking, where's the electric button? I can't open the door. And I think that in and of itself shows that things like electric door openers are being seen as something which need to be there. I don't know your state law, but actually the ADA doesn't require that you have an electric door. It's a good practice to do it. The door has to weigh a certain amount or less, but budgets are a very interesting topic. So when you look at modifying a building, like putting in an electric door opener, and they say they don't have the money, they can't just look at this little part of the budget. They need to look at the totality of the budget for the organization. And yes, rarely could they really argue that something was a hardship financially. I actually don't know of any cases where anybody has been able to successfully argue that it was an undue hardship for them to do something like this. And then there's also the individual. Are you looking at this on campus?
Yes, there's been a few campuses.
Okay, so the campus needs to look at its campus budget. And there is no way that their campus budget is not able to assume that cost. And I would say that you're looking at as an individual accommodation. And so having the electric door for students who can't open the door otherwise, I would argue is a reasonable accommodation.
I kind of want to switch gears. As somebody that has grown up with the ADA in place, and now that we're celebrating the 30 years of the ADA, what are your hopes for the next 30 years? You kind of touched on it a little bit.
What are your hopes?
A more universal design and not having to really push that I need it for a certain reason, because as you pointed out, a lot of society can use, case in point, curb cutouts. It's strollers, it's people on skateboards. It's universal. It can be for everybody. And I honestly would like it to see enforced a little more and not just bare minimums.
That's great. I want to see changes that are going on, which include changing in the number of disabled people getting jobs. I want to no longer hear stories about someone with a master's degree applying for many jobs and putting in their resume that they have a disability and getting no interviews, and sending the resume out again without including disability and getting interviews. I mean, those are clear cases of bias and discrimination. I don't want to see those anymore. I want to see that people of color and different religious and sexual orientation background on are treated, are not doubly, triply adversely affected because they have a disability. I want us to really look at how our system is appropriately educating children overall. I want to look more broadly than the ADA. I want to look at reforms within our country I want more money to be put into public schools. I want to ensure that children are going to safe schools, modern schools, where teachers are being paid appropriate wages, where kids are not dropping out of school, where they're not winding up in juvenile facilities and staying on to go into adult facilities. We need to be dealing with issues around healthcare and food disparities. So I think, you know, as disabled individuals, we need to look at the percentage of disabled people who are poor, why they're living in poverty, what we need to do systemically to make changes that will not just improve the lives for disabled people, but society overall.
And then how do we go to take these changes and turn them into reality?
We get involved in politics. We work on campaigns. We work for people. We try to get people elected who support our positions. We vote. We get other people to vote. We inform ourselves. We become a part of the solution and not just on the sidelines complaining about the problem.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work with the Obama administration on the international disability rights?
So I had the privilege of working in the State Department as an Obama appointee. I was the special advisor for international disability rights. It allowed me to do a number of things. One, I worked within the Department of State, which had, I don't know, 40, 50,000 employees around the world, to begin to get them to understand why the exclusion of disabled people in our human rights agenda needed to be changed, that we needed to be looking at discrimination against disabled individuals in education, in experiencing greater degrees of sexual violence, et cetera, why, and refugee status, why it was the responsibility of the State Department to ensure that disabled people were a part of all the work that we were doing. It enabled us to include disability in our human rights reports. It allowed us to really look more deeply at how to integrate disability into our Fulbrights, into education and cultural affairs programs, traveling, speaking, things of that nature. And one of the things that we did a lot of work on unsuccessfully, I shouldn't say unsuccessfully, we didn't get across the, what do you say in football? Goal line? Anyway, there's something called the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And the CRPD is a very important international instrument. It was developed at the United Nations between 2002 and 2006. And it basically is a treaty that has been signed by all but a few countries, including the US. And the treaty in many ways is not identical, but similar to the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's made up of 40-some articles. The articles address everything from healthcare to gender, to education, to employment, to independent living, to voting rights. And countries that ratify the treaty, 175 or so, obligate themselves to developing and implementing legislation to end discrimination in these various articles. So we, when President Obama was elected, let me just say very briefly, every country does ratification of treaties differently. In the United States, the way it goes is 2/3 of the US Senate have to vote to recommend that the president sign the treaty, not just CRPD, but many, many different types of treaties. And when President Obama was elected, he committed to moving forward with that. The first step was he had to sign a document that would then refer a document to the US Senate that they could hold hearings on, have discussions on, and ultimately bring to the floor for a vote. So when I became the special advisor, part of my responsibility was to work within the Department of State and across government to basically be able to push for the Senate to vote to ratify the treaty. Simultaneously, there's an organization called the United States Council on International Disability, and they are the national umbrella organization that bring forward the voices of disabled people on international issues. They were working very hard to get disabled people and organizations around the United States to work with the senators to get them to understand that we needed to ratify the CRPD because, you know, we're living in a world that's becoming more globalized. The importance of disabled people being able to study abroad, as an example, to be able to travel abroad, work abroad, is something that's really no longer something that's unusual. It's something that we have to be able to do. And so we were arguing that we needed the CRPD, we needed to ratify it so that our citizens would be able to benefit overseas, and that also, if we ratified, it would enable us to work with other governments in a more forceful way to get them to be seriously developing laws and implementing laws, looking at technical assistance that we could share with them and they could share with us. So we had hearings on the Senate side. It went for a vote, and unfortunately it was like 5 votes shy, in spite of the fact there were like 7 Republicans that supported this, but the vast majority didn't. And so we failed the first time. Then the second term for President Obama, we started again, and we were successful in getting hearings that the Senate held, but we didn't bring it back to the floor because the divisions were becoming stronger and stronger on the Senate side. The bipartisan work that happened to get the ADA passed no longer have existed, and so we decided that we didn't want to move this to the floor because we would lose, and we didn't want to lose twice. But it's my hope that when Vice President Biden becomes president, that we in fact will be able to move forward and get the CRPD reintroduced with a more educated disability population in the US, working with their senators to explain why it is essential that we get ratification for the CRPD to benefit both the people who live in this country and for us to be able to also play a more prominent role. Right now, there is a body that works in Geneva a couple of times a year, comes together to review reports that countries are presenting on the progress that they're making. We're not allowed to have any representative from the US to even run to have a seat on that committee because we haven't ratified. I believe there are really many people in this country who could run for a position like that, who have lots of experience, who would really benefit the committee overall, as well as benefit us in learning what others are doing. We can't do any of that. We can't really speak at the UN because we haven't ratified. It's really, it's terrible.
So this would be the next biggest step for inclusivity and being seen.
Say it again, please.
So this would be the next biggest step for us as a society to move forward with the not only ADA.
I would say on the international level, getting this treaty ratified would be really important for us as a country and to enable us as a country to play more actively overseas. But I would also say that in that happening, it would allow more disabled people to see that they could be pursuing careers that would enable them to work overseas and live overseas. So I think there are many reasons why this is really important for people to study more at universities, in international studies because they believe they can get a job with a company here that's working overseas or with a company overseas. I think, you know, the world is changing and we need to be a part of it.
And you mentioned for us as individuals in taking part in this, the biggest step that we can do is speak to our elected officials as far as our senators and so on.
Yes.
And then I do see that it is time for a question and answer, and we do have one question, so let me read that to you. It seems that COVID-19 deaths are seen by some as expandable lives or just old and almost victim blaming. It is horrible when I hear that people do not want to talk about the loss of lives and impact on our families and communities in a meaningful way. Do you have any advice for dealing with comments where people only want to talk about the numbers who have recovered and not the true impact of the lives on these individuals?
Well, I think, I'm sorry, I was looking at the question too. I think it's very important that we're all talking about COVID. We're talking about it both as individual people and concerns that we have about contracting the virus, and if we were to need to go in the hospital, what kind of treatment we would get, whether or not people will really be fighting for our lives like they would be for others, because we come in with a disability where people think our lives are less valuable than others. But I think we are certainly seeing more disabled people in organizations speaking about this. I think on a very personal note, you need to make sure that your family understands what your wishes are, so that when you go to the hospital, whether they can come with you or not, they can be speaking to people. If you're unable to speak for yourself, obviously if you're able to speak for yourself, you need to be doing that. But I think we need, as you're saying, to talk about this much more globally. I mean, I think that what we're seeing in the United States with COVID are a number of huge problems that exist that we have failed to address. We have accepted as a society in certain ways that it is not a right to have health insurance. I'm hoping now that people really see we have to have a right to have health insurance. It needs to be affordable. It needs to be something, in my view, which is paid for with our taxes at a minimal cost for people. We need to ensure that we're not seeing millions of people losing their health insurance because they're losing their jobs. But we have to grapple with this issue, and we have to, I think, come together and, you know, look at what other countries are doing and have done, and how we are an abnormality and not in a positive way. I think the other issue is that, as I was saying earlier, we've got to address issues of poverty, because when we look at the numbers of people who are dying and we look at the number of African American and Latinos and others who are dying, many of them have what is being called underlying conditions. And underlying conditions are disabilities. People with diabetes and hypertension, as an example, two of the main causes of people not recovering from COVID, have to do with poverty. People not having health insurance, not being able to treat their diabetes or their hypertension appropriately, not being able to get to a doctor. We've got to be looking at what's going on in the rural communities, the closing of hospitals, and the fact that right now the amount of money that we are spending on healthcare for people who are getting COVID because we are a selfish country, that, you know, this issue of not wearing a mask. My feeling is we should all take our clothes off and walk down the street without clothes, because people who think it's their right not to wear a mask would not want us walking down the street without our clothes, right? Morally, you shouldn't be going out on the street without your clothes. Well, where is the moral obligation to protect other people around you? I just think we have these bogus, selfish views that in the end are costing us billions of dollars that should be being spent on allowing our society to move forward. The unemployment rate as a result, the economic impact that we're seeing as a result of COVID and our selfishness, when you look at other countries and what they've been able to do, it's pretty disgraceful.
Thank you, Judy. The next question is from Steve. It says, hi, Judy. I'm 57 years old and have CP. So I was pre and post ADA and involved in activism. Do you see a connection between our disability community and the Black Lives Matter movement?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, the Black Disabled Lives Matter movement is very important. The fact that Black disabled people are coming forward and speaking up about issues that they're experiencing is very important. The number of Black disabled individuals that are murdered by the police, who may be deaf or have an intellectual disability or a mental health disability or whatever, it's a large number. These are issues we have to be concerned about. And you see this also in the Latino community, where people who have disabilities are also being adversely affected. So the Black Lives Matter movement for me as a white disabled person has been very important in many ways. It's one, the murdering of George Floyd, I think, was something that struck the vast majority of people in this country in a very deep and profound way. To see that people, police officers who are supposed to be respected people in our community that we can look to for protection, so I don't even know what words to use, cavalierly thought nothing of sitting on a man's neck and killing him, speaks volumes about the historic issues that have been going on. And so I think as a society, I'm hoping that this really is a moment that goes beyond a moment. It's really a time that we look more deeply at how our policies and practices and our history, not knowing the history of slavery, not knowing the history of disabled people in institutions. The number of people, the Willowbrook State Schools in New York and in every state around the country, the atrocities that have been committed against people in those institutions. We have to be able to look at these issues and look at ways that we can seriously address it. And I think universities, quite frankly, need to be playing a very important role here, not just for those on campus, but also to look at opportunities to bring the community in, to really have deeper discussions on what we need to do to address these issues now and not tomorrow.
Thank you, Judy. The next question is, compared to other countries, how do we get more people involved with activism in the U.S.? Besides listening and advocating, how can we make society more inclusive for people with disabilities?
I mean, I think, the disability community in the U.S. is a strong movement. I think we can compare ourselves to other countries, and on the side of the voices of disabled people, I would say we're definitely on the top. Our diversity, our cross-disability work, etc., I think is something we should feel proud about. I think the issues are our impact and our knowledge and our ability to really try to influence at the city, county, state, and federal level budgets. For example, getting states to enforce laws like the IDEA, getting the states to enforce laws that they have obligations to enforce, both federal laws and state and local laws. Enforcement is something which not only has to happen, but we need to become informed about what these laws are. We need to be involved in helping to get these laws introduced and passed. We need to understand the budget process much more deeply, and we must work in coalition. We have to be working not just across disability, but we have to be working with other community organizations, community healthcare clinics and other NGOs and DPOs that are seeking money from the city, county, and state. We need to be working together and fighting together and not separately. I think there's a lot we need to do, but we have to commit our time and we have to commit to learning. Join organizations that are not just disability organizations. Join organizations that are looking on issues around voting, voter suppression, absentee balloting. I think, registering people to vote, even though the times right now are very difficult. For me, the election in November is so essential. We see that, well, I think most people don't understand basic things like what is the role of the Senate in appointing federal judges, as well as the Supreme Court. I think many people are not aware of that. They're not aware of almost 200 judges that have been appointed over the last couple of years who, I don't want to say in a blanket way, many of whom may well not be our friends when it comes to interpreting laws because of more narrowness and discrimination against disabled people. Supreme Court justices that are going to need to be appointed next year. These are things that we have to be critically concerned about. We need to be working on campaigns for our state senators, U.S. state senators, or U.S. senators, as well as people who are going to be sitting on our school boards, on our county boards, our city councils, our state legislative bodies. All of these people are important. And I think the disability community, our organizations cannot be partisan, but our organizations absolutely can have positions on what we believe is important. Individual people can be fighting for that. And organizations can hold meetings, invite people who are running for office, ask them questions, based on what your positions for the organization are. Cannot take a position of who you want to support, but certainly can advance the thoughts that you have and get them to respond.
Thank you. The next question we have is, what have you observed to be the most effective or impactful way to help folks see their non-disability, or to help them see through the eyes of the folks with disabilities if they have no personal experience? And then, are there any examples from your life work where you've seen, let's see, where'd it go? Oh, it disappeared. We'll go to the next question then. I have a question about labels and semantics. Some of the individuals do not like the word disability. Individuals with visible and invisible disabilities. This prevents someone from seeking out resources they are entitled to. How do you believe we can frame the discussion to honor individual dignity and not make individuals feel stigmatized?
Hold on.
Heather, could you read that again for
No, I'm
Judy?
ready. Okay. I got it.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
So I use the word disabled. Some people use the word people with disabilities. There may be various reasons why people don't want to use that word, because it's got the word dis in it. For me, I have a disability. I can't walk. I don't feel any shame around that. That's what it is. And I think we have, I don't mean to be so crass on this, but we need to spend more time on substance and less time on arguing around words. For me, I think the words that people feel comfortable with are disabled or people with disabilities. I call myself a disabled person because no other minority group calls themselves a person with a whatever, right? It's like, if someone doesn't know I'm a person, their problem. I don't want to be called abled because for me, looking at having to be quote unquote abled, I say non-disabled. Because tomorrow you may well have a disability, and that's okay. So I think what I want people to be doing is focusing on what I've been discussing. What do we believe about healthcare? What do we believe about money for personal assistance services? What do we believe about voter suppression? What do we believe about these issues, and what are we doing to reform them? Spending time talking about the right word, and I know you don't mean this in a negative way, I'm sorry I can't see you, but I really think we need to say that we need to feel proud of who we are as a disabled person, as a person with a disability. I feel like I don't want people taking our language and playing around with it and feeling like they can tell me what I should call myself. At the end of the day, when we look at what goes on over the next 30 years, I want people to be able to feel proud of being a Black disabled woman who's Jewish and gay. I want, put them all together, throw them up. I want us to be able to feel dignified, respected for who we are. And no other group plays around with their words. You know, Black, African American, you know, for us, it's like we spend time on this terminology, which makes people afraid to work with us because they're afraid of using the wrong word. I don't want them to be afraid of using the wrong word. I want them to use the words we want them to use. And I want them to work with us on making changes that will benefit us and them.
Judy, you talk about having pride in your disability. How does one, if maybe they're not so confident in themselves, how does one begin to take the steps to become more prideful in their disability or having a disability?
Hi, again, sorry. I think it's something, you know, that happens by feeling good about our contributions, from living in and working in communities where disability is something which is valued, where our differences are seen as positives and contributions. And at the end of the day, you know, we have to believe that we are fighting for our rights and the rights of others. And it really doesn't matter what other people think about us. You know, what we think about us, what our community thinks about us, to me, that's what's important.
You mentioned throughout the conversation of being around people with disabilities and supporting yourselves. What has been the most impactful way for you to find those people?
Well, I did it in school. I did it in camp. I did it at university. I do it in communities. I've done it by helping to set up organizations, by joining organizations, by speaking up and out about disability issues in the religious community that I'm a part of, by trying to have friends that I can speak to. What I say is like coming together to go apart, you know, when things are happening that are difficult, and trying to strategize what to do. Or I had an experience that was a difficult experience and I need to talk to somebody about it. You know, working towards not, I mean, in many of the jobs that I've had, both at the Department of Ed and at the State Department, at the World Bank, particularly at the World Bank and the State Department, there were not, when I came in, many disabled people working there. And I think, you know, being one of the few, whether you're a woman or a Black or Latino or gay or whatever it may be, it's always important to have more than one or two people around. You're not all going to share the same vision at all. People may have very different views, but around disability, as an example, people may well be feeling similar issues of discrimination, lack of inclusion, that we can, you know, bond and talk about in order to be able to express our broader views. So I think as young adults and adults, we need to be looking out for younger disabled people and looking for opportunities for people not to be isolated. I think it's wonderful that more kids are being integrated in school, but the negative of that is that they're not necessarily meeting other disabled people. They're not seeing other disabled people in their books and TV and advertising, on and on. So we really need, I think, to look at supporting groups like the youth leadership forums around the country, but they're already dealing with kids, in my view, that are too old. We need to be dealing with kids who are younger. So, and I'm sorry for the interpreter, I'm going so fast, excuse me. So, from New York, sorry. But anyway, I think those are some of the issues. I think we need to look within ourselves at what we're doing. I think for those of you who are on college campuses, it's really an opportunity to come together, have serious discussions about what you believe needs to happen, and learning to buck the system, but not be alone on it. You know, it's like the door opener for you probably will benefit other people. So getting other students, disabled and non-disabled, to push for that door opener will hopefully get you that door opener and door openers. and, you know, make it a requirement that new buildings and renovations will include that to be able to allow students to participate equally on campus.
Thank you so much, Judy.
You're welcome. It's been great to talk with you, Heather.
It was great to talk with you too. Kathy
Thank
and Dr. Knopf, do you have anything you want to lead with?
Yeah, we just wanted to come on and tell Judy thank you. We appreciate you supporting the Ability event and supporting our efforts that we've had this summer. We've always loved having conversations with you. You gave us a lot of good information today, a lot of things to think about, and I'm so thankful that you were just very straightforward and very honest about these.
That is who I am. And change the name for next year. Not the ability, whatever.
Okay. Note it.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you all because, you know, you've done great work over the years. It's been a great opportunity also for me to continue to work with Kathy, and very nice to work with you, Amy. And Heather, you're great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Judy. And I know we had a number of participants from China on this, and they really value and appreciate, you know, your insights that they can learn from and hopefully bring back to China. It was awesome being with you in China with the State Department at that time. That was really impressive. So, you know, I love you and I miss you, and I want to give you hugs across the way because we all are missing
everybody. Thank you, guys. Stay safe, be strong.
Okay.
You too.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.